It is the year 66, barely 30 years after the death of Christ. In the Holy Land, the Jews rise up against Rome, the greatest empire the Western world has ever known. 8 people will be leading players in a deadly drama known as the Jewish Revolt. First, the chronicler, Josephus. He betrays the Jews in battle, yet writes the only account of the conflict that has come down through time. Menachem, leader of assassins and saboteurs who terrorize their fellow Jews, only to end up dying in a desert fortress called Masada. Benjamin the Essene, from a peaceful desert monastery, he will sow the seeds of violent revolt through prophecy. The 2 daughters of Philip, lone survivors of their beloved city, Gamala. Did they witness mass slaughter or mass suicide? Yohanan ben Zakkai. With the end of Jerusalem in sight, he plans to save the Holy Scriptures and the entire future of his people. Finally, the dreaded enemy, Vespasian, and his son Titus. Leaders of the unstoppable war machine, the Roman legions. Together, they intend to destroy the Holy Land. This is the stage for the Last Revolt, a war that will leave in its wake a river of blood. But how does the war begin? And what role do these people play in its unfolding drama? These are but a few of the mysteries of the Bible. This is a story of oppression and rebellion, a story of struggle and despair, and ultimately, of spiritual triumph. Titus, the young Roman general, is nowhere nearby when a common soldier lays flame to the heart of Jerusalem, the Holy Temple. Yet he knows full well that the destruction of the temple is tantamount to the wholesale destruction of the nation of Israel. In the instant of its torching, both Jewish warrior and Roman soldier freeze in momentary paralysis. All know that history must change its course here. But who will survive this cataclysm, and how? And who is responsible for the revolt's beginning? 60 years before the birth of Christ, the Romans have conquered the Holy Land. Their occupation meets constant Jewish resistance. But it would be years before a full-fledged revolt erupts. An ordinary man, known simply as Benjamin, son of Joseph, begins a 4,000-foot descent to the lowest spot on earth, the Dead Sea. He leaves behind the wickedness and corruption of Jerusalem for the purifying heat of the desert. There he will join an isolated sect called the Essenes, and there he will foment revolt. Here on desolate cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea, the Essenes have built a self-sustaining monastery known as Qumran. Though secretive and strict, they devote themselves to pure and simple living.
They dispense their anger after a just manner and restrain their passion. They are eminent for fidelity and are ministers of peace. Josephus, The Jewish Wars.
But are the Essenes the pacifists they are made out to be? Could Benjamin and his brethren be the ones who ignite the fires of revolution?
For some reason, there's a kind of false picture around that the Essenes, this group of sectarians who were devoted to healing and to brotherly love and all this, were somehow pacifists. Now, actually, there's absolutely no evidence for this.
Scholars now believe that Essenes like Benjamin may have convinced their fellow Jews to rise up against the Roman Empire. But at stake is not merely their lives. The penalty for inciting revolution against Rome is the most excruciating death, crucifixion. 3 days of lingering agony nailed to a cross before finally being overcome by death. In his years at Qumran, Benjamin is taught the virtually sacred craft of writing. He copies holy word and law onto parchment. With his fellow scribes, they create a body of work, the discovery of which will transform the modern world's understanding of the ancients. It will be known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. One of these scrolls speaks of a dark and terrifying expectation of an apocalyptic war. It tells of a decisive battle that will be fought between two groups, the sons of light and the sons of darkness. But are these descriptive terms a secret code for a plan for the revolt?
The sons of darkness are described in terms that clearly make them out to be Romans. And the sons of light are clearly the community, the worshiping community and its adherents. So they themselves anticipated a time when there was going to be this great messianic struggle between the good guys and the bad guys being Rome and the good guys being them and their supporters.
Does Benjamin the Essene, who practices peace but prophesies war, actually ignite the revolt? Some are sharply divided on this question.
What we have to realize is that anti-Roman sentiment continued to be cultivated in the Dead Sea Scrolls group. They continued to describe and preach, basically, war and revolution against Rome. So we have to assume that they must have been involved in it.
The community itself, within itself, had plenty of vigorous military imagination. And they wrote the war scroll, among other things, about the final battle, the Battle of Armageddon at the end of history. And they knew a lot about warfare, and they seemed to be very enthusiastic to fight this battle, but there is no relationship, in fact, that we know about, between them and the zealots who are fighting the war.
As the Roman general Titus leads his legions across the dusty landscape toward Jerusalem, he first undertakes an arduous detour to destroy Benjamin and the Essenes at Qumran. But scholars cannot explain why the Romans attacked them if they were as peaceful as history has made them out to be.
The Romans, on their way up to Jerusalem, when they were about to besiege it, took the time and the trouble to go down to the monastery at Qumran and to knock it over so that it finished life during the period of the revolt. Why did they do it? We don't know. We don't know whether there's enough revolutionary activity there that made them do it or whether it was just a part of a mopping up exercise.
The role of Benjamin and his fellow Essenes in the Jewish revolt may remain a puzzle forever. But of even greater mystery is their impassioned expectation of one who would one day come to lead them to salvation and redemption. He will be known as the Messiah. Flourishing here in Qumran, messianic fervor would grip the people of Israel. The people's expectation of a Messiah poses a dire threat to Vespasian and Titus. The single most important criterion for the awaited one is that he deliver Israel from all oppressors. Specifically, the Messiah is to crush Vespasian, Titus, and imperial Rome itself. Throughout Roman occupation, many Jewish leaders claim identity as the Messiah, but most would simply pass from history. Then, 35 years before the revolt, one man in particular is referred to by that term. His name, Jesus of Nazareth. His life will inspire millions of followers. But did he also inspire revolution?
Jesus is seen by the Romans and by these powerful Jews as someone who would undo the system, whose, if you follow this path, it'll lead to the overthrow of Roman rule. And it's that charge that he's crucified on.
Crucifixion is the most severe form of execution, typically meted out to rebels. But why the Romans crucified Jesus is a question that still plagues scholars to this day.
Periodically, the Roman emperors kicked the philosophers out of Rome who were criticizing too much and too deeply. They very seldom crucified them or even killed them. They just exiled them or ran them out of town. It's deeds that got you killed in the Roman world. So somehow Jesus was not only talking, he was doing something.
What was Jesus doing that so angered the authorities? On that question, the Bible is strangely silent.
And it's one that's very hard to answer from the sources that we have available, because those sources have no interest in that question. They simply see this as an act of God, as a plan of God, and aren't interested in what might have motivated the Romans.
In trying to overthrow Roman rule, Jewish freedom fighters, most of whom are known as zealots, will be crucified by the thousands. But the spirit of revolution has gripped the nation. Nothing will quell the people's hunger for freedom. Revolt against the awesome might of Rome is a terrifying proposition. At stake, the very survival of an entire nation.
Since we resolved never to be servants to the Romans, nor to any other than God, the time is now come to make that resolution true. Josephus, The Jewish Wars.
These are the words of the Sicarii rebels. The Sicarii, the most fanatical, ruthless, and terrifying Jewish sect in the revolt. For his entire life, Menachem, leader of the Sicarii, has been waiting for the Jews to rise up against their Roman conquerors. His grandfather, his father, and two brothers have all been killed by the Romans. He is consumed by hatred for the empire. In the year 66, the revolt begins. It will last 7 bitter years. In 67, the Romans attack the northern cities of Gamala and Jotapata in the Galilee. 2 years later, in 69, they assault the town of Qumran. Jerusalem is attacked in the year 70. The revolt finally ends at a fortress called Masada in 73. Menachem and the Sicarii do not trigger the revolt that begins in Jerusalem. Instead, this is the work of the man who will later become Menachem's mortal enemy, an official in Jerusalem's holy temple by the name of Eleazar. But in the face of such a powerful occupying force, one question remains a great mystery. Why didn't the Jews unite against Rome?
What's interesting is that nowhere in the record does Sicarii ever kill Romans. At no point in the historical record does Sicarii fight Romans. Their targets of their anger are their fellow Jews, who from their perspective are collaborators, are wicked, are impious, or are people who need to be destroyed.
The spark for the Jewish revolt comes from Eleazar, the temple official, under provocation from a Roman governor named Florus. The governor's reputation for corruption is unparalleled.
No one ever had less use for truth or thought out more subtle methods of crime than Florus. Making a profit out of individuals he considered poor sport, he stripped whole cities. Josephus, The Jewish Wars.
Florus journeys to the Holy Temple, claiming that the Jews owe Rome a tribute. When the crowd there mocks him, he orders the priests of the temple whipped and humiliated. Eleazar, the temple official, demands retaliation. He bans any further animal sacrifices on behalf of the Roman Emperor Nero. To the Romans, this seemingly insignificant decree is seen as an act of war.
To cease sacrifices for Rome was a direct affront to Rome. So Nero and his lieutenants, the governor, would be utterly shocked at this, and they would look upon this as, in effect, a declaration of independence.
At about the same time as the revolt erupts in Jerusalem, other events around the world are shaping history. In Peru, the Nazca Indians created mysterious figures on the desert floor. In East Africa, craftsmen began using copper to make jewelry. And in China, large stone towers were first used to mark important tombs. In the Holy Land, revolt now openly breaks out. But the Jewish people do not unite against their common enemy. Instead, as so often happens in a contentious revolt, they disintegrate into a struggle for leadership among themselves. Menachem, son of Judas, would like nothing more than to take control of the revolt himself and to become Israel's Messiah. But who is he? And what does he truly represent? Of all the feuding factions, none is more feared than the sect led by Menachem, the fanatical Sicarii. The name itself means short dagger and refers to their preferred method of executing enemies.
Nowadays, we would call them urban terrorists. Sicarii made a point, Josephus says, of blending in with the crowds, picking out their enemy, surrounding him, stabbing him, and then melting away again into the crowds and disappearing.
Menachem's first action is to slay the most visible collaborator with Rome, the high priest of the temple. In so doing, he makes a bitter enemy of the priest's son, none other than Eleazar, the temple official. But more importantly, the power of leadership intoxicates Menachem and turns him into a harsh and heartless man.
Menachem became barbarously cruel, and as he thought he had no antagonist to dispute the management of affairs, he was no better than an insupportable tyrant. Josephus, The Jewish Wars.
The citizens of Jerusalem will not support a man who behaves so tyrannically toward his own people, and so Menachem meets a humiliating end. Eleazar incites a crowd to stone him, but Menachem escapes, only to be caught by the temple priests and tortured to death. Now, without a leader, and only weeks into the revolt, the remainder of the Sicarii turn their backs on the struggle. They desert the city for the fortress of Masada. Their reason, however, has long been a mystery.
One possibility is that they were disillusioned, that they felt rejected by the Jerusalemites in the popular revolt. They tried to lead and the people didn't appreciate their leadership. Another possibility is that they maybe got some special revelation. After all, these were intellectuals and probably visionaries, lawyers. And another possibility is that maybe it's simply sour grapes.
Ultimately, in the year 73, the forces of General Titus take the Sicarii at Masada, but not alive. The night before the Roman legions stormed the hilltop fortress in what would surely have been a complete slaughter, the Sicarii decide to take their own lives. In so doing, they deny Titus true victory. Though many today admire the Sicarii for their martyrdom, there are those who view them with suspicion.
Our admiration for these fighters who are willing to take their own lives rather than to surrender to the Romans, our admiration should be tempered, at least somewhat, by the fact that these Sicarii apparently had spent the entire years of the war holed up in Masada, doing absolutely nothing to contribute to the war effort. Josephus has not a single story wherein the people of Masada come to the aid of their brethren in Jerusalem.
Today, some scholars even believe that the revolt should never have been fought.
Jewish sources do not admire the revolt. These people were fighting a war which they didn't have to fight, a war which was irrelevant to the ultimate survival of the people.
At the start of the revolt, the temple priests retain a tenuous hold on leadership, but they know that Emperor Nero will soon muster his indomitable military muscle against their tiny country. They appoint an aristocratic young man to shore up Jewish defenses in the north, in the Galilee. His name is Josephus. Their selection has repercussions that will resonate through time.
And I have written it down for the sake of those that love truth. Josephus, the Jewish Wars.
Born a Jew, the man known as Josephus fights only one battle on the Jewish side. After the war, he will take up residence in Rome, in a villa owned by his former enemy, General Vespasian. He never again returns to his native land. There he writes the only surviving history of the Jewish revolt, an account rife with glaring omissions and mystery. It will captivate but disturb scholars to this day.
Josephus is a very slippery fellow. You would not want to buy a used chariot from him. He is a man who clearly looks out for himself under all situations and is capable of not telling the truth or not telling the whole truth when it doesn't suit him.
Among the rolling hills of the Galilee, one stands out from the rest. Now serene, according to Josephus, it was the site of a bitter battle 2,000 years ago. But is Josephus inventing the story, or do the events actually take place? Jotapata is a small city of 4,000 inhabitants. Surrounded by steep ravines, it presents a formidable challenge to any enemy. In the year 66, Josephus is sent here to bolster the city's defenses against the inevitable Roman assault.
And there are all kinds of accusations against him that actually he may have really, from the very beginning, not done his work seriously, because he really was one of those accommodationists who believed that the Jews should not be revolting against Rome. In fact, he tries to claim to his Roman readers that he really only took the job as commander in order to somehow calm the revolt.
Despite the question of Josephus's loyalty, when Vespasian finally attacks, the residents of Jotapata stage a fierce resistance. The city miraculously holds out against overwhelming forces for nearly 50 days. But Vespasian's legions finally penetrate Jotapata. The city becomes a bloodbath under the Roman onslaught. Josephus himself manages to escape to nearby caves, where he hides with 40 of his soldiers. Here, his account of the battle takes a strange twist. What ensues is one of the most controversial episodes of warfare in history. The soldiers argue that it is preferable to take their own lives rather than give themselves up to the Romans. Josephus knows that it's an unforgivable sin for a Jew to commit suicide. So he works out a cunning solution. The soldiers will draw lots to kill each other. Finally, only one man will be left alive. He alone will have to take his own life.
He whom the lot falls to first, let him be killed by him that hath the second lot. For it would be unfair if when the rest are gone, somebody should repent and save himself. Josephus, The Jewish Wars.
Josephus convinces his fellow soldiers that no one should escape alive. Yet this is exactly what he will do. Is it the act of a betrayer? But in his written account, he provides an explanation as to why he himself escapes death by drawing the final lot. He claims it is divine intervention that saves him. God, he states, wishes for him to live. But scholars now believe that he secretly manipulated the drawing of the lots, in effect, cheating his soldiers out of their lives. The mystery is, which is the lie? And why does this account so strongly echo the suicide of the Sicarii?
The question of the Jews' suicide pacts is another one of these things that makes Josephus an enigma to us. The fact that his portrayal of his own situation in Jotapata is so similar to that of the daggermen, the Sicarii on Masada, makes us wonder whether it's Josephus' own construction or whether it's something he's getting from one of these pacts and then reading back into his own situation.
Despite his conflicting accounts, Josephus's open confession gives him credibility among some scholars today.
When the lot fell and Josephus was left to last, he went to the Roman camp and they received him exactly as he expected they would. He's frank, unapologetic, and straight out open about it. We understand him very well. We don't like him any better, but we understand him very well since he talks about himself in the most dispassionate and unsentimental way.
As the only survivor of the tragedy at Jotapata, Josephus surrenders himself to the Roman general Vespasian. By claiming that he has the power to foretell the future, he predicts that the general will eventually become emperor of Rome. Oddly, the general believes him, and Josephus's life is spared. He is sent to Rome and shortly begins writing his two historical accounts.
And spent the rest of his miserable life as a Roman stooge, eating off of Caesar's table, writing history, flattering Herod, whom the Romans liked, flattering Vespasian, flattering Titus, the emperors. They were paying his bills.
Only one other city in the Galilee, Gamala, is left to resist Roman conquest after the fall of Jotapata.
They lay concealed from the sight of the Romans, who otherwise spared not so much as the infants. Josephus, The Jewish Wars.
The daughters of Philip, lone survivors and witnesses to the annihilation of their city, Gamala. Once more, scholars are indebted to the Jewish historian Josephus for the only account of the battle. But again, is he inventing the story? Or does he record what the daughters of Philip truly saw?
The people had such confidence in the situation of the place that they thought no amount of enemy could overwhelm them. Josephus, The Jewish Wars.
The city of Gamala is built along a steep citadel in the Golan Heights. Surrounded by perilous ravines on three sides, it is virtually unassailable. Indeed, its people have already withstood a 7-month siege by the Romans. In the year 67, Vespasian and 3 mighty legions march on Gamala. After a long offensive, the Romans breach the walls and pour into the city. The defenders flee before the charging centurions in the only direction they can, up the hillside. But halfway up, they muster new courage, regroup, and turn on the Romans. Vespasian and his men are surprised by the move. They are now caught between the rush of their own forces and the attacking Jews.
And in order to get away from the press of the people behind them or the press of the Jews in front of them, they climbed onto the roofs of the houses. But one person's roof is another person's street. And none of this could take the weight of soldiers on them, and a house fell down under the weight, and as it fell down, it pushed the house underneath it down, and pretty soon the entire city was crashing down the hill, down to the bottom of the ravines, and taking thousands of Roman soldiers with them.
Suffering terrible casualties, Vespasian retreats. But respite for the few survivors of the city, including the daughters of Philip, is short-lived. The Romans lay siege to the town for another month, and then attack again, this time with renewed vengeance. Once more, the townsfolk flee up the hill. Masses of humanity swarm to the summit. Still, the Romans come. The family and countrymen of Philip's daughters have no option to choose the unthinkable.
A great number threw their children, their wives, and then themselves down the precipices into the valley beneath. Josephus, the Jewish Wars.
Josephus reports that more than half the city leaped to their deaths to avoid capture. Of the 9,000 inhabitants of Gamala, only 2 survive, the daughters of Philip. But scholars question Josephus's account. How the residents of Gamala died is still a mystery.
Josephus says that they all sort of joined hands and committed suicide, but I think the much more likely reading of the account is that they simply were pushed over by the force of Roman arms.
Nevertheless, archaeology confirms much of what Josephus has written about both Gamala and Jotapata.
The mystery whether the town was here or not, whether the town was under siege or not, whether Josephus was right or it was only his imagination, this is a mystery that was solved. The remains of the war here, the destruction of the town, the abandonment of the town at the 1st century, those are real proofs for Josephus' description.
But despite the archaeological evidence, some mysteries remain unresolved.
The stones themselves tell us that there was a war here, that there was a battle here. They don't tell us why there was a battle here. They don't tell us why the people decided to rebel. They don't tell us the kinds of conversations people had with one another. They don't really tell us what Josephus did.
Despite his split loyalties and seemingly unscrupulous methods, history owes Josephus a lasting debt for the accounts he left behind.
About Josephus, they said, you can't live with him, but you can't live without him. The Jews hated him forever because he turned sides in the middle of the war and defected to the Romans. But he's a resource without which the entire world would be poorer, for without him, we would never have known what happened in this war.
The Galilee has now entirely fallen to the Roman legions. Now they turn their sights to the south, to the heart of Jerusalem itself, and to the one thing that stands as supreme symbol of the Jewish struggle for freedom and independence, the Holy Temple. From his modest home near the temple in Jerusalem, Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai watches with growing dismay as the city slowly starves. In the year 70, the Roman general Titus and an army 80,000 strong encircle the city and strangle it. For 6 months, food supplies dwindle to almost nothing. When ben Zakkai sees men boiling straw and drinking the broth, he realizes that the city is doomed. He must escape. But how? And if the Jews lose their capital and their holy temple, what will become of their faith and their nation? In July, Titus and his legions finally attack. They quickly scale the outer walls of the city and march to the very precinct of the Holy Temple. But do the Romans dare destroy this holiest of places, this sacred institution that has existed long before Rome itself? Titus calls a council to decide. Some advised burning the temple outright. Others, only if the Jews will not surrender. According to the writings of Josephus, Titus resolves to inflict Rome's will only upon the people and not on their hallowed temple. Whether Josephus's account is true remains a mystery.
I find that story very, very hard to believe. It's much more likely, I think, that Titus sat around with his advisors and decided this temple must be destroyed. I think he came to the realization that if the temple is allowed to remain, the Jews will continue to be a problem.
Scholars may never know what Titus really decided to do. They know only that in the Roman attack, a common centurion picks up a burning torch and with it alters the course of history. As the flames spread, the temple is plunged into chaos. Jewish warriors cry out in anguish. In the midst of the battle, and without any regard for their own safety, they frantically struggle to extinguish the blaze. But water is scarce, and the wooden beams of the temple are dry. No one can stop the inferno, nor the Romans as they lay waste to the entire structure. The centurions spare nothing, not even the single most sacred room in all Jewish tradition, the Holy of Holies. This is a room so sacrosanct that only one man, the high priest, is allowed to enter, and even then, but once a year.
Curtain over the Holy of Holies was actually pierced with the sword of the Romans. According to Talmudic tradition, the Romans actually did certain acts to purposely defile the Jewish temple, and the destruction took place.
The Jews watch their faith, their hopes, and their national identity reduced to ashes.
Thousands upon thousands of Jews were killed. Thousands upon thousands of Jews were taken as captives and sold into slavery. The city of Jerusalem was destroyed. Numerous people who survived lost their livelihood. This was a major traumatic event.
The people had a land that was their own, centered in a capital that was their own, centered in a religious center, the temple that was their own. And now that was all destroyed by the Roman armies. what in the world could happen to this people without this center. There were just scattered pieces, and it wasn't clear how those pieces would be put together.
The cost of the revolt in human lives is inestimable. Roman domination has even taken the life of one of the greatest spiritual teachers of the time, Jesus of Nazareth. But for the Romans, the conquest of the Jews is marked by widespread celebration. The empire issues a new coin depicting their triumph, and Titus erects his famous Victory Arch in Rome. Jerusalem is rendered uninhabitable. It lies in ruin. All that remains are several Roman fortresses and a single courtyard wall of the Holy Temple, known and venerated today as the Western Wall. At the height of the war, one man alone manages to avoid battle and preserve Jewish tradition for all time. He is the learned rabbi, Yohanan ben Zakkai. But is he merely a beloved figure of legend, or did he actually exist? Reports of his actions come only from accounts written centuries later. It will never be known whether they are true or not, but they tell of the man who realizes that Jerusalem is doomed and that his nation is in peril. Ben Zakkai decides that he must preserve a copy of the Holy Scriptures from the temple. Tightly clutching the sacred scrolls of the law to his robes, he instructs his disciples to seal him in a coffin and bear him to the city gate. A guard there threatens to pierce the coffin with his sword, but a disciple manages to prevent him from desecrating what he says is the body of his beloved teacher. The guard allows them to pass. Once outside, Ben Zakkai contacts the Roman general and flatters him with praise, calling him a future emperor. The ploy works. He secures the Romans' permission to establish a religious academy at the coastal city of Yavne. In time, he produces the most important single work in all Judaism. Along with other rabbis, his efforts at the academy result in nothing less than the consolidation of the 39 holy books of the Hebrew Bible, known today as the Old Testament. The Jews would now have a document that would enshrine and preserve their faith, a document that would take the place of the Holy Temple itself, for the temple would never rise again.
The temple represents a piety, a religiosity, a way of life that was old, the way of the past. To get rid of the temple allowed the Jews to create a new culture, a new civilization that in fact would be the way of the future. I would say that new culture is far superior to the old one. It is one which is far more portable, far more suited to allow the Jews to survive the next millennia. And had the temple remained, I don't know if or how that culture could ever have developed.
Jews would yearn for an independent state for more than 1,800 years. Their hopes only bear fruit in 1948 with the creation of modern-day Israel. In this saga of a people and a land whose shores have been awash with the blood of countless wars, perhaps the greatest mystery of all may be why the Jews have retained a unified and resilient faith in the face of so much destruction. The answer may lie within the hearts and stories of these people in the Holy Land itself, for each had a role in an epic drama that once played out here almost 2,000 years ago.